Hello, my name is Brittany Benson, and I did my learning segment on sexual orientation and LGBTQA. As you can see, here is my lesson plan here. The past 4 years, I've worked as an assistant and then a substitute teacher at the high school level, so I decided to do my lesson plan for 10th grade students. In my lesson, I will address Standard 2. Students will analyze the influences of family, peers, culture, media, technology, and other factors on health behaviors. In Standard 3, students will demonstrate the ability to access valid information, products, and services to enhance health. These are the 4 learning objectives that I'll aim to cover in the lesson. So students will be able to explain the difference between one's gender, biological sex, and sexual orientation. Students will be able to define and understand the LGBTQA terminology. Students will be able to locate one website and one service in their neighborhood that provides resources and advocates for the LGBTQA community. And students will be able to identify how the media portrays LGBTQA individuals. So my whole teaching philosophy as a teacher is that I want my students to be hands-on with my curriculum and content. So I just don't want to disseminate a bunch of information to students and hope that they grasp onto it. I want to provide them with a lot of activities that they can relate to, a lot of group activities, a lot of group discussion, in ways that they can uncover their own attitudes and beliefs instead of just pouring information onto them. So one way of doing this, I will be doing a bell ringer activity as an opening. I think journal work is a great way for students to reflect on their own attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors prior to receiving information and hearing from others. So a big thing that I'll do in my classes is that when they come into class, I want them to sit down, they'll grab their journals, and there'll be a prompt at the board. So this prompt will be, think back on your first crush and when you first saw this person. How did you feel? Were you instantly attracted to this person, or did someone tell you how you should feel? What qualities did you like? And if you didn't have a first crush, describe someone who you would imagine liking, or it could even be a celebrity. So in this, I'm hoping that through this activity, students will start thinking about the traits that they find attractive. But not only that, I want them to start thinking about where sexual orientation derives from. So is it innate? Is it something that's just we're born with? Is it natural? Or is it developed through learned behaviors? Or does someone have to tell us who do we like? So does it come from mom or dad? Does it come from our siblings, friends, family, the media? So I want them to really start thinking about those kinds of ideas. So when they're done journaling, we'll come together, we'll have a group discussion. I'll ask students if they want to share their responses. And then from here, I'll start throwing in those guided questions to have them start thinking about what their thoughts are on this topic. So once we wrap up that group discussion, we'll move into the PowerPoint. So here is the PowerPoint that they'll be seeing. The first slide here asks students about sex and gender. So the main question will be, are these terms synonymous or are they different? A lot of students at this point might think that these two terms are exactly the same, that if you're born male, then you're a man. If you're born female, then you're a girl or a woman. So with these definitions that I'll show the students, sex being the biological characteristics that define humans as male or female, so those are the chromosomes that we're born with, XX, XY, and then also gender, socially constructed characteristics of women and men, such as norms, roles, and relationships between people. So using these two definitions, I want students to start to think, are these two terms the same? Are they different? How do they differ? Is sex and gender identical? So we'll be talking about things like that. Here in the sexual orientation slide, I have a working definition of sexual orientation and sexual identity. So we'll discuss that sexual orientation is the people that we are sexually attracted to and have the ability to love. And then sexual identity is one's self-identification as heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, queer, or something else. For some students, some of these words and definitions may be tough to grasp if they haven't been exposed to them before. So I really want to use examples that are relatable. So I might say that if I'm born a female and I'm attracted to males, I will self-identify myself as heterosexual, and therefore that is my sexual identity. But this could differ for many different people. So by giving them those examples, I think that'll help them grasp the concepts. We'll also talk about theories of how sexual orientation is formed. And the big emphasis is that these are theories. They're not true statements. They're not facts. Based on studies, this is just what some of the thoughts that we're posing as to why some people may be homosexual versus heterosexual. So first we'll talk a little bit about biology. So we'll talk about how some studies have shown genetic differences in DNA. There may be some prenatal factors such as stress during pregnancy and the fraternal brother effect. So that effect just being that if you are a male and if you have older male siblings, it's thought that you may be more likely to be homosexual. We'll talk about how studies have not shown any hormonal differences between heterosexual people or homosexual people. And then also brain factors, that there's some studies that show differences in certain brain regions between heterosexual and homosexual individuals. We'll also talk about learned experiences. So the learning theory states that we learn through experiences and what we see and observe. So this theory states that through positive experiences, we want to continue those positive experiences, and then the opposite with negative experiences. We want to discontinue these experiences. So we're not born with a certain sexual orientation, but we develop this through the positive and negative experiences that we have. We'll also talk about how it's thought that society may have a role in developing our sexual orientation. So it might not be something that we're born with, but depending on the society that we're in and what that society is telling us, it may develop that sexual orientation. We'll also look at this picture. So I really like this picture because it's pretty simple. The first time I saw it was in an undergrad course in sociology class, and it really shows how sexual orientation, gender, and our biological sex are all different. So here are those definitions that we went through. They separate gender with gender identity. So what I'm identifying myself as, male or woman or a man, and then my expression, what kind of traits am I showing to the outside world. And then here, now that I've given them those definitions, I really want them to start thinking, how does sex, gender, and sexual orientation relate to one another? Are we still thinking that these are the same terms, or are we starting to notice that these are different terms? And then I want to talk about how all 4 of these bullet points may affect each one of these and how they relate to one another. So we'll talk about the societal effects. So if society is telling us that we're supposed to behave one way, are we more likely to behave that way? Heteronormativity. So this has been the prevalent concept in our society for many, many years. And we'll talk about how being heterosexual is the norm in our culture, and anything else is almost seen as abnormal. But this has been changing. So we'll discuss where students think that we are as a society. We'll talk about gender roles. So what is expected of us when we are a certain sex or a certain gender? Do these relate to one another? So if you're a certain sex, does that mean you're a certain gender and therefore you have certain roles? You can even see in this picture, the male here, he has a video game, he has the money, so maybe he's the breadwinner, and the woman has makeup and she has a pacifier, so she's the caregiver. And then this also relates to femininity and masculinity. If you are a certain sex or gender or sexual orientation, does that mean you're more feminine or more masculine? So we'll get students' thoughts. This will be a group discussion on how all of those relate to one another. And then finally, I'll bring up the slide. So I'll introduce LGBTQA, and this will be able to access valid information and services. So through this worksheet, they can use their iPads to research all these answers. So they'll define all these terms. They'll then answer a few questions, and one question specifically saying, find a service within your neighborhood that provides resources and advocates for the LGBTQA community. That's what I'm really, really looking for here, and then obviously having an understanding of what all these terms mean and more. And then here they'll just list their resources. I'll give them time to work on this as a class. So we'll move down in the lesson plan. So they'll work on the worksheet, we'll come together as a class, we'll answer any questions, we'll discuss our answers, and then from there, we'll wrap it all up, and I will assign them their homework assignment as the closure activity. Let me pull up the assignment. So it's LGBTQA in the media. This relates to Standard 3 of understanding how outside influences affect our health behaviors and attitudes. So they'll write a 1 to 2 page response describing how they believe the media portrays LGBTQA individuals. They'll use these 3 questions to guide their responses, and it'll all be based off an analysis of their 3 favorite TV shows or movies. And the following day, we'll discuss their answers. And that is my lesson. Thank you for tuning in. And then down here are my references.